Hi, hello everyone. My name is Shula Sinclair and I'm from MEC. Today we are going to discuss a topic that has come up repeatedly over the last 24 hours, indeed, during Ad Week, and that is the tension, if we believe there is one, between emotive, gut-wrenching communications that spur you into action versus data-driven, optimized messaging that drive efficiency and catch our audience at the right time. We have a very esteemed panel today, and you'll excuse my snazzy notebook as I read out the names of the people present. So to begin with, we have Jay. Jay is Senior Vice President of Media Solutions from MasterCard, obviously one of the owners of the most emotionally compelling campaigns of recent years. We have Rich Harris, who's Global Vice President of Oracle Data Cloud. Is that the full title?
Group.
Look at that. I already gave him a promotion off the back of this panel alone. Scott Allen is CMO of Microsoft UK. And based upon his description of what he actually does, that sounds like an understatement. And last but not least, David Burnham, who's Director of Enterprise Marketing at Adobe. We're going to be quite data heavy in this conversation. So I want to begin by asking our panel, what's their favorite ad of all time and why?
Oh boy.
Aha.
Well, that's cheating.
No. My favorite ad of all time is the Mean Joe Green Coca-Cola ad.
Oh, that's a classic.
When he walks off the field and tosses a smelly shirt to a little kid in exchange for a Coke. It's fabulous, yeah.
Okay.
Man, that's a tough one. I think I definitely used to like the Bud Bowls, you know, where you'd always try to figure out during the Super Bowl, like which side is going to win. I thought those were fun.
So, because I love Christmas, it's got to be, again, Coca-Cola. Holidays are coming. Every time that comes on, I get very excited for Christmas.
Right.
And it's something that's been around for a good 30 years. So
Right.
I love the little kid in me coming out when that comes on.
Okay, and I've also got a Christmas ad, which is the John Lewis ad. I know there's so many John Lewis ads, but the one with the little boy who buys the present for his parents, and they think they want it for himself, but, himself, and that always that always gets me as well. That's a bit of a gut wrencher. So
Cool. So that was a surprise question. They didn't know about that. And the reason is, in our prep talks for this session, we've been focusing a lot on the data and the optimization piece, but less on what has been gut-wrenching for our data experts here on the panel. So could you also help elaborate? Could you also perhaps explain to this audience how you use data within your role today to drive insight?
Yeah, so I could start. So I should explain, I don't work on the marketing side of MasterCard. I run a business at MasterCard that commercializes the transaction data asset that we sit on. So I'll talk about it in that aspect. But I think what's happening in media trading is it's going from a very linear process where it's planning, separated by activation, separated by measurement, to a very holistic and circular process where we're planning, we're activating, but then we're measuring at runtime and using it to kind of feed that back and forth. And that's a really big change. And the other really big change we're starting to see in the business in terms of how data is used is moving from a very transactional campaign-based model where most of the business and the way most people in this room make money is through activation to something that's more always on. And we could talk about that because there are tremendous impacts that are going to have to take place both in the infrastructure, maybe that some of us up here run, and but also in what I call the edges. So all the organizations, the advertisers, our merchants, the ad agencies, and the media owners are in the process of changing. So the infrastructure can build capability, but it's got to build it to drive business outcomes, and then the edges have to get comfortable with using the infrastructure too, and that's a work in progress.
That's a great description of what we do.
Yeah. All right. Good.
That's kind of what we do.
I think we're all after it. Yeah.
So could you expand, Rich?
Yeah, so we collect data from many different sources. Some of the top data providers really in the world, also very small websites, you name it, and we're linking all that data together with a unified identity graph, and then we're actually creating audiences from that data so that marketers can identify people and show the right campaign to people to hopefully evoke emotion, the right kind of emotion. And then, of course, on the back end to try and measure the results of that campaign and then continue to do better each time. So, you mentioned getting into the audience planning process and to start to make this a more holistic solution. And I think that's absolutely the goal. I don't know that we're there yet, really. I mean, there's a lot of these piece parts work quite well individually, but I think the system as a whole still needs some work, and that's one of our goals, is to really make it more of a holistic solution that's super easy to use.
First of all, I don't call it data. It's more information, and actually that can be competitive advantage. So we're really working hard on using data, both internal data but also external data coming together to start looking forward. So we're even going to a motion of, let's not spend a meeting looking 90% backwards. Let's look at a meeting and spend 90% forwards with the 10% looking backwards bit. So by bringing data from internal sources, external sources, it's allowing us to make some really clear decisions, both on targeted marketing, which could be more middle funnel to purchase, but then more front funnel, which is where some of the emotional stuff comes in. And I'm in a fortunate position in Microsoft UK where I look after both consumer and commercial, and we don't treat the two as separate now. We bring them all together. But we are now starting to invest in what I call scientists in the team. So I've got a team that I've made up a lot of part creative, part scientists, and I think that's really important to have that, rather than being all creative or all scientists, because then you've got the data team working quite nicely alongside the more creative team. That means that you actually don't have to come up with bland marketing just because you've got data there. So we're pulling that sources in, and that allows us to think about front of funnel marketing all the way through to that purchase stage, and it's different types of marketing, obviously depending on the product and the audience you're trying to go after.
So from an Adobe marketing perspective, I suppose we're in the fortunate position that from obviously we're using data from on a day-to-day basis in kind of the way, probably in a similar way to Scott is on the kind of commercial side of his business. Trying to link across the funnel, understand which channels are working, which channels aren't, link online and offline experiences and so on and so forth. But then I suppose the other side from our perspective is we're lucky enough to work with many brands around the world who are trying to do exactly the same thing. So everybody from NFL to Marriott, MasterCard, so on and so forth, and really trying to help them to not just use the data in terms of things like attribution, but actually how do you turn that into emotive experience? How do you, from an Adobe perspective, we're lucky enough to have the kind of our creative cloud software where agencies and creatives work and they create fabulous experiences. But now increasingly what we're seeing is this link between how do you take data and then actually action it as a marketer very quickly by joining those dots between the creative side of the business and the marketing cloud.
So how often do you see that happening?
Not enough.
In reality?
Not enough.
That's the thing, because we've talked about the promise that data can bring to drive engaging communication, and it's relatively easier for us to optimize towards the purchase end of the cycle. However, the promise of the insight that Adobe, for example, have told us exists isn't necessarily connected today. So why is that?
What we see is we see two things. So we did a study earlier this year on data-driven maturity within businesses, and we found that around 19% of companies can kind of, they either feel they're at the end goal, very small number, or they can kind of see a way to true data-driven maturity where they're genuinely leveraging that data to create experiences within their business. However, what we also see is we track sentiment year on year and marketers' top priorities. And what we saw this year in our digital trends study was that actually doing this is now the number one priority for marketers. And the shift in the past 12 months has been incredible. Like 12 months ago, of course we talked about data-driven marketing, but it certainly wasn't the top priority that we it was maybe number 4, number 5. Now it's right at the top, and what we're seeing marketers doing is really massively focusing on that drive. And we see it come in waves. So we saw the mobile wave, and then but now we're really seeing this experience wave coming through. It's mobile, social. Now it's experience, and you really see marketers focusing on it. And I think it's really important as well, because as a marketer, you want to be respected in your business, right? You want to show business impact. And how can you do that unless you can really show how you're driving experiences that move people, and you're able to measure it, and you're able to show attribution at the end of it? So we see that motion.
The data is there, I think, to do this, but one of the challenges is that a lot of folks just aren't equipped, or maybe we're not doing as good a job as we could as an industry in allowing them to extract the insights from those data and put them into action. There was a panel earlier today where one marketer said, hey, I've got too much data, I'm marketing a car, and so, for example, what does it matter to me if I find out that people who are interested in this car also like canoeing? And from my perspective, actually, that's a super interesting insight that you could use to create an emotional connection with your customer. And so the fact that that statement was made shows me that we're not doing our job, right? We need to do a better job in showing folks how to connect data to better understand their customers.
I think the other thing is, how serious are you about wanting to use data? We're quite easy to go and spend lots of budget on creating new content, going to numerous events, whatever that might be. But actually, has anyone really sat down and put in what is a MarTech strategy, got their board, really bought into why we're looking to invest in that, and say that we're going to do that as opposed to doing this, rather than just doing all the traditional marketing tactics and just hoping that the data looks after itself? So at some stage, there has to be an investment in that MarTech area. And I'm finding within Microsoft, that's falling on me to figure that out, not on the IT department. Working with them, but us to come up with those ideas and then bring the leadership team and the board along with you on that.
This is exactly the convergence that is advertising technology, kind of all the infrastructure in the middle coming together with marketing technology. So large CRM type systems and how it gets used, what the business purpose is too. So I was going to pick up on the canoe story and say we were looking at something for a cruise line. Yeah. And the original ask was, tell us what segment of the population spends a lot on cruises. All right, so you would think that's kind of bottom of funnel, it's transactional, right? Very important, but where's that emotional piece? And we said, well, hey, we could also tell you about correlations that say people that spend a lot in cruises spend a lot of money on their pets, okay? So it's just it's a silly little example, but it's really important in that it's all about what is the business use case and where do you want to tie it together, right? And we'll see if these guys agree with me, but I think a lot of people talk to technology in the middle and they ask all about how does it work? How is it coded and built and the structure of it? And stop asking those questions. Ask, can we drive a business outcome for you? Talk to us about your business problems and see if we can help you solve them.
I agree. We could have a big discussion about how more data points usually lead to better prediction in models, right? No one cares about that. What they care about is, hey, this audience that you gave me for pet lovers that also like to do cruises, did that actually perform when I created a campaign and targeted them? And that's the number one question. Did it actually drive? I don't know if you're selling pet food or cruises, but one of the two.
Right.
It's because those cruise passengers have always got their pets in kennels, presumably.
Yeah.
They're never actually looking
It's a
after them.
guilt thing. Yeah, that's right, exactly.
But actually, I think that's a really good point. I think that we need to focus on business outcomes, and Scott's point is totally valid. Another stat I saw recently was that 55% of marketers don't actually believe that their businesses buy into data-driven investments at all. And really, I think the question we've got to ask is, why is that? It's, presumably businesses like the idea of having positive outcomes. They like the idea of revenue growth. Are we doing a good enough job of articulating the story as marketers as to why businesses need to be investing in this stuff? Traditionally marketers like to be in silos, right? That's what we do best. So getting out of those silos into the wider business and accepting that this is deep business change, and actually it is quite hard, but I'm going to have to do it because actually my marketing is no longer about my one campaign that's going to be perfect and beautiful. It's about always on nurture programs. It's about the daily grind. It's about joining the dots across channels. And that's where the beauty is, because actually that's where the humanity comes through, because actually that is what will deliver the better experiences that ultimately will drive more loyalty.
So yeah.
I can feel a butt coming, Sheila.
No, I just wonder if there is another tension, and is it something we can resolve today? But is there? You talk about the John Lewis ad. John Lewis ad doesn't come from an always-on strategy, and yet John Lewis as a brand is seared in your imagination, and will probably influence the purchase decisions you make in the future. Does this new model allow for room to create those emotional climaxes that connect with our audience? Since this is the...
But what John Lewis have done is they've really understood how to leverage that piece of creative. Yeah, maybe it did start as one piece of creative, but they've really understood how to leverage that creative strategy across so many different channels now. And and you see in the way they cut that ad up, and you get the preview, and then it launches on YouTube. I mean, think of the ad spend save for John Lewis of the fact that 12 million people had seen that ad before it premiered on TV.
Absolutely.
Incredible.
And to your point about experiences, they
made an experience out of it.
They do.
Yeah, and we were part of the John Lewis advert at Christmas, so we were part of the. We had the Fox. That was when they aligned to us. But how they got 4 or 5 key partners involved in that meant that it allowed them to get even more reach, because we were then amplifying out our sales for our own and paid channels as well. So they've really brought a partner strategy into that as well, which then connects with even more audience that maybe they don't connect with normally.
Right. What does success look like when utilizing data to the best possible degree? What does that?
Well, we talked about business outcomes, right? So ultimately, the marketer's job is to drive more sales of a particular product. And so if you can actually measure that lift in offline sales or online sales, then that is the ultimate measure of success. If you can also link it to being caused by the campaign, right? It's very, very difficult to do, though. I mean, this is a complex analysis. We have a system for doing that in the US. There are other folks that have those systems as well. Outside the United States, though, the ability to measure, particularly lift in offline sales as a result of an online campaign, is very, very difficult to do. So you have to look at proxies, other measurements, and that makes it a little bit fuzzy as to whether or not you were successful. And so it leads a lot of people to say, well, did data work or did data not? It's going to be tough to make that judgment until we have better deterministic measurements of offline sales.
And I just want to say, this is definitely happening in the U.S. market, so we can tie ad exposure to sales and sales lift. And we will start to do this in other markets around the world. So this proverbial closed loop that we've been talking about for years and years and years, that's consumed human lives of panel time, is finally happening.
Right.
It really is finally happening. And it's happening in that circular way that we talked about, so that always-on way that can feed back in at runtime.
Okay. We are down to our last 10 minutes by the looks of it. Are there questions from the audience? Do you agree? Disagree? Oh, one at the back.
I'm impressed you could see that.
Hi, hello. It's Richard from Publicis. I'm really interested in the attribution side in terms of the tying media spend back to sales, and specifically how you'd get that transactional data, because there's obviously there is some available, but on very small quantities. So what kind of models you'd use and kind of where you think the future of that will go, so to be able to tie specifically media spend back to sales.
Yeah, so I could start. So at MasterCard, obviously the core asset that we build the solution off of is the transaction data from the global payments network that we have. And in a very simple way, what you do is you take the ad exposure data and you look at who was exposed to the ad. You have a control group that did not see the ad, and then you look and see if what the aggregate and percent sales lift is for the folks that saw the ad. So it's actually fairly straightforward. And again, I think the innovation we're starting to see in the U.S. market is not to look at this kind of in a manual way towards the end of a advertising flight, but how to look at it in that circular way. And I think you'll start to see this type of insight feed back into some of the optimization engines run by the technology platforms.
But there's some additional complexities to it. So, for example, you have to look into down to the SKU level, for example,
Sure.
and understand what specific products people purchased and whether or not they're actually purchasing more of that product after being exposed to the ad. And then also taking a hard look at, okay, the control group, they may have been exposed to a certain number of ads for that product through television, for example. Was it really the digital ad that drove that offline sales lift? And then, of course, if it's an online conversion, that's a lot different. You can measure that in a much more deterministic way. But getting all these different data sources, tying them together, and being able to perform these measurement analyses on a repeatable, scalable basis, it's pretty tough to do, and it requires assembling. For example, we've assembled a large co-op of data, as well as the ability to link that offline SKU level data to online identification, which we just haven't seen outside the United States yet.
I think where it gets tough is when you want to try and connect above the line to below the line. So I think below the line, we can track right from a paid media strategy all the way through to sale. We can do that today. We've got some rich data that we can then make decisions of where to invest that media moving forward. It gets harder if you're doing some TV advertising, which is more around sentiment and reach. If that person doesn't do anything, it's hard to track it all the way through. So we've got more work to do at that sort of ATL reputation piece, and I would love to be able to measure reputation in different ways. There's no silver bullet. I think that's, as a community, we need to work that out a little bit more. But that's where we find it a bit harder, that connection of above the line and below the line. So that's
I think that point, though, is getting easier. I suspect within 3 years we'll be in a very different place.
We'd love the silver bullet in 3 years if we could.
It'd be nice, wouldn't it? But if I look at what we were doing during the Olympics, where we worked with NBC, again comes back to a US example, right? But we're doing dynamic ad insertion during the games for everybody who was watching the streams, but actually, increasingly now people are watching these big events using the streams. That's when the possibilities are suddenly opened up, right? But and the more that streaming grows, the more opportunities we will have to have that. I believe Sky are launching a version of Sky Q this year, which will be pure streaming, no satellite connection anymore, and all of a sudden, if that goes mass market, then you see real opportunities there with dynamic ad serving and linking that back into a DMP and all of those good things. You know, you start to see opportunities there to actually really get genuine above the line attribution. I think that's a really exciting part of the industry right now.
You talked about business outcomes. Do we, the panel, acknowledge the need to connect with our consumers emotionally in order to drive those business outcomes? And if we do we measure it well enough today?
Yes and no.
Yes and no.
I don't think we do.
Yeah, I mean, definitely yes and no. I think that's fine for now, as long as you're taking your leadership team, the people who are invested in you, along with you. So it's fine to talk about reputation and really get across the point that it's not about $1 in, $3 out.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to go and talk a lot about take market and make market. Well, taking market is go get business today. Make market is you've got to go and define a market.
Yeah.
That's reputational play. It's not $1 in, $3 out. If you get your leaders coming along with you on that journey, then I think it's easier to land that story. But we have to get better at it as time goes on, and as technology gets better, as we get better, I think we'll figure a lot of that out.
I mean, I think one of the best indicators of why we're maybe not doing as good of a job as we could is the rise of ad blockers, right?
Yep.
Ads are still, for the majority, in most cases, annoying to people. So we're not doing a good enough job.
Yeah. So what would need to change in the way we measure, the way we connect with consumers moving forward in order to improve the way we communicate to them?
What do we need to improve, you're saying?
How do we need to measure differently in order to deliver more compelling communications to our consumers so they don't feel they need to block us?
Well, I think if we use data-driven insights across planning, activation, and measurement, then we will drive better business outcomes, right? Because we'll understand what consumer we're speaking to, what consumer we're showing the advertising to, and then we can measure the efficacy of the entire effort. So, and I think that is well in progress, and everybody just needs to be aware of it, and that it's coming together, and kind of everybody needs to kind of pitch in and do their piece, and it's all coming together very, very fast too. So that's the other thing, that having been in this business for a long time, it's like going to school every day. It is super, super exciting. We're all so fortunate to be part of it.
It's I think business outcomes is one part of it. I think the other part, and we talked about this earlier, is the value exchange, right? So what kind of value are you providing to the consumer in exchange for them watching this ad? Are you actually streamlining their decision making? Are you adding to their life in some way? And if you look at the great example always is Google Maps.
Yep.
That's a clear value exchange people are comfortable with. And it's a lot more difficult when it comes to other types of online advertising. And I think that's where you not only have to drive business outcomes, but you also have to think about how do you create a value exchange that's balanced and one that the consumer is going to be interested in engaging in.
Okay.
I think, don't think about creativity and data as two separate things. Data does not have to be bland. Data does not have to be boring.
Right.
It can actually help you be more creative. That allows you then to be better at some of the marketing that you do, which means that by default you'll be more emotionally connected. What it also does is mean that you probably don't waste a bit of money trying things out where you go in a bit more blind. At least you can try. I'm a massive fan of, with the team, of saying, take some risks, but don't take incompetent risks. And there's a big difference between the two. If you've done your research and you try something out and it doesn't work, hey, there's no problem with that. If you've done it blind, that's sort of a bit more incompetent because you haven't really thought about it. So data can play a really key role.
I think the key to that, though, is marketers ultimately are going to have to get over this idea that everything has to be perfect.
Yeah, done is better than perfect, for sure.
I think that is the big challenge for a lot of us over the next couple of years, is to get past this campaign-driven mindset. 85% is good enough. Get it out, iterate, optimize,
100%.
Learn, run it again.
100%.
Cool. Gentlemen, we are slightly running over, but thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks.
Much appreciated.